I'll tell you a little secret about ministers that you might not know. Most ministers will tell you without hesitation that given the choice between performing a wedding or a funeral, they will choose a funeral every time. Does this surprise any of you? If the only wedding you've had intimate knowledge of was your own wedding, you know, the one where everything went smoothly and all the diverse members of both families joined together in the storybook celebration of love that you always dreamed of. Well, then you might be confused by my claim. I think we all know that weddings can get a little crazy, and really it's a holy honor to be part of an important day like someone's wedding. But because weddings can get crazy, over the years I have collected some great wedding stories. These include, but are not limited to, the time the groom fainted out cold and right while his bride was reciting her vows to him. Or the time the musician didn't show up, my 10 years of piano lessons failed me, and I had to run down the hall asking if anyone knew how to play Here Comes the Bride on the piano. Or there was this one time when one of the bridesmaids veered from the middle of the aisle as she processed, brushing her excessively hairsprayed hair a little too close to one of the candles. These are all true stories. Performing weddings can be stressful, but you collect some pretty great stories along the way. I don't know whether Jesus performed many weddings, but he certainly told stories about them. Our gospel lesson today is on page 24 of your New Testament Pew Bible, if you'd like to follow along. Today's parable from Matthew's gospel is one of these wedding stories, but if you were listening closely to Reverend Linda as she read it, you will know this one is not so funny. In fact, this parable is yet another passage in Matthew's gospel that just doesn't sit right with us. It's distasteful and harsh. It doesn't lend itself to easy interpretation. Any way you read it, it's bound to offend someone. Some version of this parable appears in Luke's gospel and in the extra-canonical Gospel of Thomas, but neither of those recountings come close to the urgency, the direct manner, even the harsh tone with which Matthew tells it. Now, you and I know that every gospel account in our Bible tells the story of life with Jesus from a little different perspective. That's only human, as we know, because we watch courtroom dramas in which people who live through the same exact experience tell the story in different ways. So this morning, we would do well to remember that the writer of Matthew is a Jew. He's writing to a Jewish audience. Scholars think he wrote his memoirs toward the end of his life, shortly after the Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, during which that city was sacked and the temple, it was destroyed. In the writer's memory, these words of Jesus from decades before were speaking harsh judgment to the fractured community of Jews in Jerusalem. He was predicting that an inability or an unwillingness to heal their hurting community would surely result in deep destruction. The way Matthew remembers Jesus telling it, the story is an allegory, a commentary on the political situation of the time. This is how it went. The king, of course, is God. The son for whom the king is throwing a party is Jesus. And the king's stewards are the elite Jewish leaders, the people who refuse the king's invitation to the wedding banquet, and the man who comes to the wedding not dressed appropriately. Well, those are the folks within the Jewish community who prefer to keep the status quo as it is. Those who fail to recognize Jesus as Messiah, who refuse to admit that the power structures in the temple need revamping. Over thousands of years since Matthew penned his memoir, of course, this parable has been co-opted and used in very dangerous ways by Christians who preferred to take this wedding story and use it as evidence of a vengeful, wrath-filled God who gives license to hurt, kill, exclude Jews, Muslims, other Christians, anybody who thought differently than we did. In short, we have before us today a wedding story that was not intended as an allegory for our situation, that has been misused and misinterpreted with vigor for thousands of years. So you and I read this wedding story of Jesus as recounted by Matthew, and we're left struggling to understand its application for our lives. There are many things from our 21st century perspective that make interpreting this text as allegory dangerous. Some of us would even say impossible. For one thing, if God is the king throwing the party where everyone is welcomed, how come God invited the popular crowd first and only invited the rest of us because the cool kids wouldn't show up? That's certainly not the God that Jesus introduced us to throughout the gospel story. And if the king is God, and if everyone is invited, who is this God who meets us at the door, checks to see if we're following the dress code, and if not, throws us into outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth? Is this the God who welcomes the stranger and insists that you and I forgive our enemies? I'm thinking, no, not so much. This parable is not about us, which is why you may have noticed that this is not a text for which preachers line up to preach. It's too hard to make the allegory work. But we believe that the Bible is a living text, full of fresh perspectives for us in all times and all places, the Word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So we're not going to shy away from this parable today. Let's take a fresh look at Matthew's memory of Jesus' words and see if there is any way that we, the people of God at the Riverside Church in the city of New York in October of 2014, might hear a word from the Lord today. Begging Matthew's pardon, what if we hear Jesus' wedding story like this? There is a king who decides to throw a big wedding party, and he invites all the notable people in his social circle to the biggest event of the year. We, the institutional church in America, are just like the king in this story. We have long been in the process of throwing one big party in celebration of our status in society. For decades, especially in this country, the institutional church has been the bastion of morality, the compass of compassion, the gathering place for the socially prominent. But lately, in the past few decades especially, we've been getting everything ready, throwing fancy parties as we've always done, resting on liturgy, tradition, and rules that have served us well for hundreds of years, and, well, people aren't showing up. In fact, they're intentionally going away, off to do other things, and sometimes they're even making light of what we do. The ridiculous rigidity of our party that doesn't speak with any authenticity or authority to the situation of our world. So sometimes when we notice that people aren't showing up, we give in and we bend the rules a little. If the popular crowd won't show up, we'll open our doors a little wider. Maybe we'll expand the guest list because we're following our convictions, but mostly, if we're honest, we do it because we're scared that nobody's showing up and we desperately need this party to be a success. And with the pressure of declining influence, We're gradually adopting stances that are a little more edgy, trying to get people to listen to what we have to say, to invite us again to the table, trying to give the voice of the institutional church some legitimacy again. We're even mixing up the liturgy, trying new strategies for bringing in the crowd, stocking coffee bars, hiring rock bands, working every angle we can to make ourselves popular again. The thing is, though, that we are the church. We are an institution claiming to follow Jesus the Christ. And so, Jesus keeps showing up to challenge our desperate grasping that is so often void of true conviction. Jesus shows up right there at the big doors of our institutional life together, just like your unruly first cousin who talks too loudly and is really embarrassing. And Jesus is wearing just the wrong thing. He's wearing messages like, we don't measure success by numbers or buildings or budgets. We measure success by faithful community. He insists the real party is not what the outside world sees of us. The substance of our life together unfolds in the moments where we choose to live with each other in love, through conflict, to respect each other, to tell the truth, to do the hard work of human community. Jesus claims we're not always the most effective when we're present in the halls of power or at the tables of the most popular. We're following Jesus more closely when we take up the cause of the poor, when we speak for those without a voice, when we insist on justice. Jesus keeps saying, your work is to love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, turn the other cheek, give away what you have. And when Jesus shows up wearing messages like that, well, we're bound to think he's dressed inappropriately. Perhaps this parable speaks into our modern day life together as the Church of Jesus Christ and asks us the question, when Jesus shows up wearing the wrong thing, asking us to live boldly into a new way of being the church, insisting that we offer up our socially dominant position, that we do the hard work of loving and including and living the gospel right here, what are we going to do with him? My apologies to the writer of Matthew's gospel for my liberal license with his memoir this morning. But I can't help reading these words intended for a first-century Jewish community and wondering what this story has to say to us, the institutional church in America in 2014. As an institution on a national level, we are facing a crisis. One commentator noted this week that folks aren't looking to us with the same esteem they used to use. He wrote, "To the society at large, the church has become better known for its perceived homophobia, ignored child sexual abuse, amateurish political activism, and mindless young earth creationism, rather than the good news of Jesus Christ." Ouch. Of course, this wedding story Matthew told wasn't told as an allegory for our community, but the words and witness of Jesus in this living text are certainly meant for us. You may be aware that today is Hands Up Sunday, a weekend where faith communities all over this country are speaking out and calling for an end to police brutality, and specifically the mounting deaths of young African American men at the hands of the police. There are many, even from this community, who have traveled to Ferguson, Missouri this weekend to protest. We, the Church of Jesus Christ, should be speaking out, calling for an end to this terrible state of affairs. But hear me when I say, no No one is going to take the church's insistence on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri seriously until all across America, faith communities begin taking the words of Jesus seriously inside our walls. What Jesus did for his original audience when he told this story, he continues to do right here. He shows up wearing the wrong thing, inviting our outrage, because what he's asking us to do is outrageous. He's extending to us an invitation to see life in new ways, to live boldly into the promise and possibility of the gospel, and he pushes us. He pushes against our carefully maintained standards of comfort and conformity to change the way that we look at our practical and institutional life together. As hard as we can try to keep Jesus down, to push him back, to insist on the way we've always done things, to banish him to the balcony, to throw him out as far out as we can, but he will keep coming back, dressed all wrong, until we open our hearts and our hands and our lives and our institutions to welcome the one who is always inviting us into God's ongoing recreation of this world. These words from Matthew, they are hard, hard words. Today, listen up. May we hear them again, and may our hearts be changed. Amen.